this video, it's all about this topic, layer 3 switches. So let's talk about that. And obviously, let's also talk about, what's the difference between having layer 2 switches compared and having layer 3 switches. And probably you're thinking, Jorge, I got this. I can tell you right now the difference between a layer 2 switch and a layer 3 switch. And by the way, Jorge, I can tell you what layer 3 switches do. And probably, yes, you will be able to answer those questions. But now my question is, how well are you going to answer those questions? How different are you going to answer those questions compared to the other candidates? You see, that's exactly what you need to focus on and think about. Okay, how can I position myself? How can I market and sell myself by me answering this question about layer 3 switches in a way that they can see that I have more value to offer than the other candidates? And I go back to the same, the way that you communicate what you know. And you see, probably you will be able to come up with a good basic answer like most people. But I know once you go through this video, you will be able to get a lot more than just basic for you to see like the big picture and many details that probably you have no idea about layer 3 switches and the difference about, with layer 2 switches and routers. So make sure you go through this video, and obviously if this is new to you, go through this video not once but twice and take notes the second time that you go through this video. Now, let me tell you one thing. And that's about a conversation that I had a few weeks ago with a senior network engineer. You see, I like to ask many questions to successful people. And one of my questions was, and that's because I found out that he's one of the guys that goes through the process and asking questions to candidates that are going through the job interview process and getting a job. So I asked, okay, so if you're one of the people there basically decide who gets hired or not, let me ask you a few questions, about the process that you go through. First, can you tell me some of the questions that you ask the candidates? And can you tell me why you ask those specific questions? And the last thing is, when you ask those questions, I want to see like your thought process, I want to see exactly what you're trying to get out of the candidates, when you ask those questions, what type of an answer. And he gave me gold. And you see, if you think about it, the questions that I asked, obviously I asked a lot more questions, but just based on that, I asked 3 critical questions. And I got like valuable, like gold of information. And he told me something that has to do with this topic. You see, Jorge, that's one thing that I always ask. And that's that, can you tell me the difference, if any, between a layer 2 switch, a layer 3 switch, and a router? And Jorge, this is exactly what most people answer that question. Oh, that works on the layer 2 of the OSM Aero. Oh, that works on the layer 3 of the OSM Aero. And that's, by the way, the network layer. Oh, that, yeah, works like a router and a switch. And just basic, very basic. And you see, they think they answer that question properly. But you see, I was not looking for that. I want to see into the details, like how much they know. And if it's just basic, I don't think that I will be hiring that person. So think about this. This is someone that asks questions to people that are going through the job interview process. And this is something that you will find a lot more throughout this video. So the next time someone asks you something related to layer 3 switches, you will be able to come up with a badass answer. They will help you to position yourself like a badass, that you will be able to sell and market yourself really well in front of everyone that you are basically telling the answer. Okay, so take note. So now going back to the topic, layer 3 switches. So as you know, we can call layer 3 switches multi-layer switches, right? Now that makes sense, but now let's think about this. Why a layer 3 switch can also be called a multi-layer switch? What would your answer be? What would your answer be? And make sure to answer that question not based on a technical answer, but something that I can see, something that I can, think of. for me to say, wow, I really see exactly what you're trying to say. So how will you answer that question? You see, because one way for me to answer that question will be like, okay, so look, Jorge, you have a layer 3 switch. Layer 3, that means that that network device works on the layer 3 of the OSI model. And by the way, that's the network layer. And by the way, that's another device that works on the network layer, layer 3 as well. And that's the router. And now think about this, right? So you have layer 3, but it's a switch. So now you need to think of, okay, if it's a multi-layer switch, that means they works on 2 different layers of the OSI model. So what that means is that the network device, the layer 3 switch, it's a router and a switch in one, right? So that's one way for us to see it, one way for us to look at it. But you see, I will go in more detail. That probably that statement it's not true. Huh, right? And you're probably thinking, Jorge, that's true, man. What are you talking about? It may not, and I will walk you through and why that is. And the first thing that I will tell you based on that is that layer 3 switches are switches. Layer 3 switches are switches with routing functions. With routing functions. Okay? So one more time, because probably like you see, like, okay, I get it, but no, you're not getting it. Layer 3 switches are switches with routing functions. You see, many people think, oh, Jorge, no. Layer 3 switches are like routers, you know, because, you know, they do everything that router does. And I'm like, no. Right away, when you tell me that, right away I know that you don't know well layer 3 switches. And by the way, by you telling me that, I don't think you have enough experience as well, you know, working with layer 3 switches. Because you see, let me tell you something. People think that layer 3 switches are routers, and layer 3 switches are not routers. Layer 3 switches are not routers. Again, layer 3 switches are switches with routing functions. Right? So you see, it's not like, oh, no. You know, you get all the functions of a switch, and then you get all the functions of the router, and you put these 2 in one box, and that's a layer 3 switch. No, wrong. No. The layer 3 switch, it's a switch. But you add on top of that routing functions. Not all, but some routing functions. And you see, probably you didn't know this. Now, if I'm the manager, or let's say I'm the senior network engineer, and I ask you, okay, that was a good answer, you know, something basic. But now let me ask you, can you tell me some of the functions that routers have, but layer 3 switches don't? What will your answer be? Tell me, what will your answer be? And probably you don't have an answer for that. Probably up to this point, you thought, Jorge, like I thought that all functions of switches and all functions of, you know, routers will be combined on the layer 3 switch. No. Again, a layer 3 switch, it's a switch, but they add some, not all, some routing functions. Okay, and I will talk about that more in the next few minutes. So let's go over this process, okay? So layer 2 switches, let's talk about layer 2 switches so we can see like the big picture. You know, if I give you 2 minutes right now, what will you say about layer 2 switches? And by the way, these are 2 of the models, Cisco models about layer 2 switches. We have the 2950s and we have the 2960s. You know, but what can you say about switches? You know, that will take you probably 2 minutes. Like, Jorge, you know, switches work on the layer 2 of the OSI model, the data link layer. They're all about MAC addresses, physical addresses, you know, they're all about, you know, frames, you know, they're all about, you know, port security and those Cisco switches. We also can do VLANs, obviously trunking, Ether channel, you know, what else? VTP, what else? You know, I can keep probably going on and on and on, and a few other features. Again, that's on switches. Now let's talk about routers, right? And again, here are some of the models: 1800s, 2800s, 3800s. Obviously, there's a few more. Now, what can you tell me about routers? Tell me, what can you tell me about routers? Oh, you know, it's all about IP addresses, routing, packets. But what else can you tell me, you know, about routers? Like, what else? Oh, you know, WAN connections, quality of service, you know, VPN, access control list, obviously routing, and that's based on a static routing or dynamic routing. You know what else? VPN, what else? NAT, network address translation. Whoa, so you see we have many features with switches. We have many features that we can do on routers as well. Now, for us to think that, okay, so a layer 3 switch, what they tell me, it's based on a combination, right? So now we have a combination. Like, no. You can see it that way, but a true statement, it's not properly correct on saying that. Okay? Yes. This is a switch. Remember, this is a layer 3 switch. So obviously it's going to do everything that switches, layer 2 switches does. But based on routing, that's few functions that you cannot do with switching on a layer 3 switch. And that's something that I'm going to talk about again in the next few minutes. But right now, you know, for you to know, have in mind, these are some of the models. We have the 3550s, the 3560s, the 3750s, and the 4500s. And I have one here that's a 3750. Obviously, this is a layer 3 switch. And if I go back here, a 3750 will have this characteristic, okay? And that's about stack-wise. And that's what I can add another, let's say, 3 more switches, and I can manage the 4 total physical switches as one, because I'm gonna stack each one of them. And what that means is that switch, the one on the top, you know, let's say switch 1, I'm gonna connect it with switch 2, and then switch 2 to switch 3, and then switch 3 to switch 4, and then let's say this one is switch 4, one of the, depending on the number, because I cannot see the number, but on one of those, I will be connected all the way to the top on switch 1, and that's stack-wise, and many companies have that implemented, okay? Again, something for you to know. Now, another thing that you have to think of, that more likely you thought when I asked you about layer 3 switches was this, right? Inner VLAN routing. Inner VLAN routing. That's something that, Jorge, that's the first thing that I thought of when you asked about layer 3 switches. And that's something that I'm going to talk about, obviously, here. But now, let's take about 3 minutes, or let's take 5 minutes. So stop the video and go through this process. Based on this network diagram, what can you tell me that it's related to layer 2 switches? Because obviously I can see that we have a layer 2 switch, and it says right there, layer 2 switch. So what can you tell me about this related to, and our focus being on switches and right now, and based on the IP addresses that I have, based on this router, I mean, would you be able to come up with something really good for you to tell me for the next 5 minutes and just basically go on and on and on based on everything that it's, you know, going through your mind when you see this picture? Because for me, again, you can go through this process if you want, but for me, I will be like, okay, so what I can see is a 2960 switch. That's a layer 2 switch. I see that we have 3 computers. I see that we have, like, let's say 2 servers, and based on the IP address, okay, I see that we have all of them, they're class C IP addresses. And by the way, they're private IP addresses. And I can see too that we are using the default subnet mask, 255, 255, 2550. But you see one thing that I noticed, and that it's obvious based that we have 1, 2, 3. We have 3 different VLANs. So I haven't taken a look on the IP addresses, but it seems that based on the 3 VLANs, that means that we have 3 segments, that we have 3 networks, that we have, you know, before in one big broadcast, now we have like different, that broadcast was break down probably depending on how the switch is configured, but so far based on what I see, you know, and everything that's connected, 3 broadcasts. Again, 3 networks, 3 segments. You know, and based on VLAN 580, you know, I see that the third octet, it's 200. And the last octet for each of those servers, 202 and 205. So here we have VLAN 55. This one obviously needs to be in a different VLAN. So I can see that's VLAN 55, that third octet, it's 10. So that makes sense. I have another 10 right here, but let's take a look, right? So this one belongs in another VLAN, and this one, the third octet, it's 20. So you see now I can see like the big picture. I can obviously tell you more about that. I can tell you more about the switching too. But now, compared to layer 3 switches, because that's exactly our focus, right? To compare, many people don't know this. And that's probably something that you need to think about and you better know. So next time someone asks you, you are able to say this, okay? And by the way, I can see that we have a router, and that's because we have VLANs, and these computers that belong on different VLANs, they obviously need to reach out that servers, you know, so they can access network resources. And for that, to make that happen based on this layer 2 switch, we need a router. And that's basically what we call routing on the stick. And by the way, once we make that connection to the switch, we have what we call trunking. We have to make those connection trunkings. And on that router, we need to create some sub interfaces. And that's basically on one physical interface to create some virtual sub-interfaces, obviously one for each of the VLANs that we have. You see, that's the way that you need to train yourself, your mind, to go on and on and on about this type of technical topics, okay? So now, one thing, again, is that when you have a layer 2 switch, you can go up to 1,024 VLANs. Now, thinking, Jorge, that's more than enough. And yes, I get it. I've never been in a company that have more than 50 VLANs, you know. But again, that's one thing for you to know. So that's one thing, 1024 VLANs with layer 2 switches. Now, layer 2 switches more likely are for the access layer. Now, I'm not talking about the layers of the OSI model. You see Cisco have this way on how to connect, you know, end devices, you know, computers. Network devices, and that's based on 3 layers. We have the access layer, we have the distribution layer, and we have the core layer. Now, layer 2 switches, more likely you will find those on the access layer, and that's basically when you have the end computers and obviously some like servers and some, not all, and some and most printers connected to a layer 2 switch. Why? Because it's just the access layer, not the distribution, the access layer, okay? So now let's change this. You know, we got some budget on our company. You know, this was a proposal. They're like, you know, it will be better if we get some layer 3 switches so we can replace not all of them, but some of them that make sense. That one probably they have some servers connected to it and upgrade it to a layer 3 switch. And that's exactly what happens. And as you can probably see, we no longer have a router for us to do router and the stick. Why? Because now we have a switch from a layer 3 switch. Remember, layer 3 switches, you know, has some routing functionalities. One of them, obviously, routing. And with VLANs, we can do their inner VLAN routing, you know, within that layer 3 switch. And that's basically what we call inner VLAN routing. No need for an external router. So that's one of the things that will be like, okay, that's really good. Another one is that a switch, it's just a switch until you type IP routing. So when you log on to the switch, and by the way, this is the name of the switch, let's say, and then when you go to global configuration mode, you need to type IP routing. And this is obviously something that you need to know. A lot of people don't know this. Again, the way that you sell that to someone else makes a difference because it positions yourself like a badass. So if someone asks you, hey, you know, about layer 3 switches, you can probably say, yes, you know, they work on the layer 3 of the OSI model, you know, the network layer, you know, they do some routing functions and blah, blah, blah. And okay, next question. But you see, that's one thing that you can sell really well. And that's it. Oh, about layer 3 switches, let me tell you. You see, when you take a switch out of the box, it works. So when you take the layer 3 switch out of the box, it's going to work. It's going to work, and it's going to only have functionality of a switch. So that's a switch. Even though it's a layer 3 switch, works on the layer 3 of the OSI model, the network layer, and a lot of people will tell you that's also like a router. Yeah, that's true, but when you take the switch out of the box, it's not true. It has only a functionality of a switch. But if you log in, console into that switch, and you go to global configuration mode, now you type IP routing, bam. Now you can use the functionalities, like some of the functionalities of a router. Many people, even when they know that, they don't tell that, they don't communicate that to other people. You see? And I do remember that, now I don't know how long ago, but someone asked me when I was going through the job interview process, like the difference between, a layer 2 switch and a layer 3 switch. And obviously I was able to come up with a badass answer. I got the job. But one of the things that I remember saying was, it's not a router until you type IP routing. And it's not like it will be a full router as a functionality, but some of the functions. You see, the way that you sell what you know, the way that you communicate what you know makes a huge difference. But now you know better. So again, I take this switch out of the box, I plug it in, and it's just a switch. It's not a layer 3 switch, it's just a switch. But me, right, being the network engineer, what I can do, I can type on global configuration mode once I log into the switch, IP routing, and bam, now has some routing functions, okay? Now, the other thing based on VLANs, we can go up to 4,096 VLANs. I'm not gonna say that, that's no way that companies will have more than 1,000 because I never been, but if we think about those big corporations that have, locations like all over the world, maybe, who knows? I never worked in a company that had more than 50 VLANs. And those were like big companies. Again, who knows, right? So, but with a layer 3 switch, you can go up to 4,096 VLANs. The other thing that you need to think of, that you need to say, is that layer 3 switches, more likely you will find those on that distribution layer. So you have the client computers, printers, connected to a layer 2 switch. And that's basically the access layer. Now you're gonna connect the switches that are on the access layer, layer 2 switches, to that layer 3 switches. And that's where is on that layer, the distribution, okay? So basically, if I go back here, okay, so this switch will be connected to a layer 3 switch, okay? And that's, again, layer 2 switches, more likely you will find them where? Access layer. And layer 3 switches, you will find them where? Distribution layer. Again, this is something that you better know, and you better tell someone when someone asks you about layer 2 switches, about layer 3 switches, the difference between those two, or what about routers? Always come up with something that it's gonna make sense, and obviously for you to talk about other topics that are related to on the topic that they ask you, okay? Always remember that. If not, you're just gonna be like everyone else. So let's moving on. So we talk about that, we talk about that distribution layer. So now, bam, this is where you need to take notes. And this is something that I will give you for homework. People don't know this. And one thing is for me to say this, but I'm gonna start going through and doing these videos that I'm putting out there at no cost on YouTube. But I'm gonna start doing some of the things that I do with the videos that I post only on the members area for my coaching program, because it's all about how you approach and learning a topic. And a lot of the videos, I always put something for them to research on, because one thing is for you to go through the video, one thing is for you to go through the exercise, and another for you to go through the topic by approaching it on research mode. And probably not the way that you do it, because that's ways on how to do it right. And that's something that I teach on the process of learning, the coaching program. So anyways, so this is something that I'm gonna ask you for you to research, okay? Because let me tell you, layer 3 switches, they do forwarding based on hardware. Okay, they do forwarding based like layer 2 switches do, based on hardware, okay? Now, routers do forwarding based on software. Now, my question to you is, which one will be easier for you to upgrade? A software or a hardware? Obviously, right? A software. So, again, do some research about this, okay? About layer 3 switches, focus on basically what they do, the forwarding decisions based on hardware, and routers do forward based on software. Now, the other thing that I will tell you based on that is that yes, you can use layer 3 switches for you to configure some of the dynamic routing protocols like EIGRP, OSPF, and that's a good idea when you don't have that many of route entries, okay? But when you basically have a lot of routes entries because you have different networks, different locations, now you need to get basically a router, just a router. Many people think, what would you spend a lot of money on a layer 3 switch, on a layer 2 switch and a router when I can just get, and saves, a few thousands if I just get a layer 3 switch. But you see, it's all depending, I go back to the same, and the network environment that you have and what's the need for what and getting a router, Now, again, that's something for you to have in mind. And that's something, again, that you can say when someone asks you about that. Remember, and I'm going to keep saying this again and again, and all of my videos, the way that you communicate, and I know that you are learning a lot through my videos, but if you really want to be like that badass, and really learn the psychology behind it, because it's a psychology behind how to answer questions and all of that, join my coaching program. And that's where I will help you. You go through over 400 videos and coaching through me and one-on-one. So again, you want to take your life and your IT career to the next level, that coaching program, or do that membership type. So going back here again, so that's one thing. Now, layer 3 switches, I was working on this project on my previous position, and that was something related with quality of service. You have some functions that you can do in a layer 3 switch that are related to quality of service. Now, that's for another video, and that's the reason why I put it limited. So you don't have that full functionality of quality of service as you do with routers. So you see, that's another thing for you to think about. Now, routers, they have WAN connections. That can be T1, serial connections, and obviously many others. But layer 3 switches don't. Layer 3 switches don't. You see? So it's not the same, having a layer 3 switch and a router. And many people, they have no idea, but they think they have an idea. They will tell you they're the same. They're not the same. That's why I told you. That's the first thing that I told you right away. I wanted to make this simple. Layer 3 switches are switches. That's it. But when you type IP routing, then you add some, not all, but some routing functions of a router. You see? So the next one too is NAT, Network Address Translation. Layer 3 switches don't have that function. And that's obviously a few other things that you can Google it, But the main ones that you need to know for you to use, for you to answer a question, for you to present this to other people, for you, so they see that you have value to offer, that you really know, or for you to have a conversation with another IT engineer, that's more than enough. And once you go through this, the way that I'm asking you to, you will be able to answer a question related to this topic better than anyone else. And that's, again, one of the reasons why more likely you will be able to get the job. So now you know what to do. Like the video, share the video, and make sure to follow me on Instagram. Underneath this video, there should be a link for you to follow me on Instagram. And obviously, I will see you, talk to you, teach you a lot more in other videos. So I will see you there.